Hi, everybody. It's Maynard, and it's Tuesday. I'm with Mike Bradley, and we're going to try it again. I think we are in for the best show ever. I'll go out on a limb, and it's because we've got some special guests. In particular, we've got Dan Sullivan, the U.S. Senator from Alaska. Dan is a great friend of industry. He's a great friend of TPH. Dan's background, as you probably know, he was the commissioner of the Natural Resources Department in Alaska. He was the Attorney General. He was in the Bush administration State Department. He is a Marine. And he and his wife, Julie, have 3 lovely daughters. So he's a great guy, and we're exceedingly lucky to have him. We also have, I mentioned Mike Bradley. Colin Finton is back with the Colin Finton Moment and Chart of the Week. And we also have David Maravilla, who's with the Horizon Group. David is a specialist in Mexico, and he's going to try to tell us what the heck happened last week, David. And then we're going to wrap up. Matt Portillo's got 1 minute of why you should feel so optimistic about natural gas. So he gets to close with the upbeat moment of the week. Let me start with Dan Sullivan. Senator, again, we are so lucky to have you, and thank you so much for joining us. You're joining us there from your office in Washington.
Great to be with you.
Well, it's fantastic. Can we start? You've been involved in, since you got to Washington, so many of the things that energy people care about, whether it was infrastructure, policy, relations between the White House and Congress. What would you say is the mood right now in Washington around energy issues? You've been in all these meetings, on the phone with the Saudis, in the White House when the president was meeting with executives. What would you say is the mood around energy in Washington?
Well, look, I think it's a challenging time given what's happened with the coronavirus and the pandemic and how it's impacting the economy and the energy sector. Couple things in that regard. I think there's been and I can go into the details, but a real sense that as the pandemic started to impact, the global economy, and there's a lot of reasons why it happened, but when the Saudis announced on March 6th that they were going to essentially conduct a major price war and production war with the Russians, that it was a moment of irresponsibility from the leadership of that country that, was very poorly timed. The world's dealing with this pandemic. The world's dealing with a cratering economy. And a supposed ally of ours takes action that some of us viewed as trying to maybe use this as an opportunity to wipe out some of the American industry. And as you know, Maynard, it did have a very negative impact on a lot of places, including my state. Certainly the price drop of oil wasn't solely due to the supply shock that the Saudis and the Russians induced upon the global markets, but it was primarily the demand shock of the coronavirus in the economy. But there was a lot of, I would say, Republican colleagues of mine, senators who have been from energy-producing states, but have also been strong supporters of the U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship that, to be perfectly frank, I led a letter to the Crown Prince, led a meeting with the ambassador, and then the Saudi energy minister, all of which we were very frank to the leadership saying, we've been strong supporters, but you're taking action right now that not only is undermining global energy markets, you are negatively impacting thousands, probably tens of thousands of the people we represent. In my view, that's a red line that, I don't care how good an ally country is when they start hurting my fellow Alaskans by the thousands, it's game on. So I introduced legislation with Senator Kramer of North Dakota to remove all U.S. military forces from Saudi Arabia. I'm a very active member of the Senate on military issues. I'm still a colonel in the Marines. I chair the Readiness Subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee. And we put legislation forward that I told the Saudis would probably pass with veto-proof majorities right now.
So, Senator,
So I would say that's one element. I would say on the good side, and I'm probably going too long here, but
No, you're doing great.
the administration, I think, I was the Attorney General and DNR Commissioner for 6 of the 8 years of the Obama administration when I was in Alaska, and those really great jobs for my state. That was an administration that was extremely hostile to energy production, particularly in Alaska. We joked about it. I think I was, with the exception of the Texas Attorney General, I don't think there was an AG who sued the Obama administration more than me, because every day you'd wake up and there'd be a new lockup, shutdown, delay of production from Alaska by the federal government. It was ridiculous. We had to fight our own federal government to produce energy and produce good jobs. The contrast with this administration is just remarkable. The president, his team, by the way, the president played the key role on the Saudi deal, but they've been 120% supportive of the energy, the jobs that it produces, the economic security that it provides, the national security elements that it provides. I think one thing that came up in the meeting with the president that certainly impacted me, but I think had an impact on him. This is the meeting just about 10 days ago. It was mentioned that in the 2008-2009 recession, the sector of the U.S. economy that really drove us out of that deep recession was the energy sector. And some estimates are upwards of half the GDP growth initially coming out of that recession was due to the oil and gas sector, the great jobs that it creates for workers in my state and others. And, that was during the Obama administration when they were so hostile to it. So one of our arguments, I think the president certainly was interested in it, is as we get out of this rut that we're in, and hopefully we'll get out soon with this pandemic, that you need a strong energy sector, even if you're not from an energy producing state, to really help turbocharge our recovery, and like it did in 2008, 2009. And I think those are kind of things that, make this administration really strong proponents. They've been great in Alaska. We got ANWR open in legislation. The president proudly signed that. So I don't think you've had a stronger administration for what's a critical industry for Alaska, Texas, North Dakota, but really for our nation.
So one question for you, Senator. When I think all of us at home, watching people fighting and popping off on television, behind the scenes in Washington, is it more cooperative or less cooperative amongst all parties, just trying to get to solutions? There was the money was removed from the I guess it was the House or Senate bill for the SPR. There's been some public stuff going on, but is it better behind the scenes or worse?
Well, look, in my experience in the Senate, I'm someone who's a real big believer in, bipartisanship, working across the aisle. So I always say it's much better than the media loves to show the conflict. The media loves to show people fighting. So in my experience, you just look at the CARES Act that just passed. That's the big relief act for dealing with this coronavirus pandemic. That passed 96-0. It's a huge bill. And a lot of the stuff I've worked on in my career, particularly on issues that relate to the environment, I'm someone who really cares about cleaning up our oceans. I've had legislation called the Save Our Seas Act. I've led on that, Save Our Seas Act, Save Our Seas Act 2.0. I have really good friends who are Democrats, bipartisan support for that legislation. So there's a lot of bipartisan work, even like rebuilding our military after Obama cut it by 25%. A lot of that's been bipartisan. But I would say, Maynard, for whatever reason, the Democratic Party, I think, has really lost its way, at least the National Democrats. We still have pro-energy Democrats in Alaska. But the National Democrats on energy and oil and gas have kind of lost their minds. So in that realm, there's not a lot of bipartisan, it's kind of, they're all moving hardcore to the left on the Green New Deal. you mentioned this issue of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I mean, normally something like that, when you have low oil prices, the SPRO is very non-controversial. You know, they took a lot of pride in stripping out the $3 billion that we put in the CARES Act to fill up the SPRO. So that is an area I think that should be concerning because, you know, even and I like to mention this, even on the environment, one of the arguments I make a lot in the Senate, on the Senate floor, is, you know, by producing in America, it's actually really good for the environment. People cock their head like, what are you talking about? I said, well, go to Alaska, right? I used to be in charge of that. We have the highest standards in the world. In the world, it makes it expensive. We recognize that. You know, ice roads, ice pads for exploration. You can't even, there's no impact on the tundra at all. Big rigs on, you know, we have a winter exploration season. So if you need energy, which we do, greenhouse gas emissions have declined significantly over the course of the last 2 decades. Why is that? Not because of Obama's EPA or anything like that. It was because of the revolution in the production of natural gas. So if you need energy, which we do, you should want to produce it in the places that have the highest standards in the world. Alaska, the rest of America. And when you shut it down here, what do? You drive it to Russia, you drive it to Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan or Brazil, Saudi Arabia, all places that don't even have remotely the environmental standards that we do. So the Dems are becoming very irrational on energy, and that is a problem.
One question for you, Senator. You were an early proponent of an infrastructure bill early in the President Trump's administration. There's been some talk of that more recently. Do you think we might see something along those lines? And do you think does the administration see it in particular as a way to help energy? And how do you avoid a big fracas around that bill that becomes a policy debate on energy and some of the things that bog us down?
Well, I think it's a great question, Maynard. I think, again, on infrastructure, it's actually quite bipartisan. I sit on the Environment and Public Works Committee. We've already passed out a 5-year highway bill. That's big infrastructure. That was 21 to 0 out of the committee. So every Republican, every Democrat voted for that. We're getting ready to mark up what's called the WRDA bill. That's the Ports and Harbors bill, again, on the Environment and Public Works Committee. That'll pass probably unanimously. So this is big infrastructure. I'm also someone who's a real big believer, and you and I have talked about it, in streamlining our permitting process. Pipelines, roads, bridges. It's crazy that, you know, the Keystone Pipeline took 9 years to permit. Again, that goes to some of our friends on the other side of the aisle who, I'm not sure what they would rather have, you moving it in trucks or moving it in rail. It's much more dangerous than to put it in a pipeline. But I think there's a really good opportunity for that kind of basic infrastructure. I've talked to the president about it a couple times just in the last 2 weeks on what we're calling phase 4. You know, the idea that once we get out of this pandemic, this CARES Act is really kind of like a tourniquet to help, and hopefully we will get through this, small businesses, the bigger sectors of the economy that are being negatively impacted. Once we get through it, what do we need to kind of turbocharge the economy to really start cranking again? Because, you know, when we went into this pandemic, we actually had quite a strong economy, strong energy sector. And infrastructure to me is one of the really key ones. And we've already passed out of the committee I'm on, 1, and we'll pass out here soon, 2 really key components of the next infrastructure bill. The president is very supportive of it. So I think there's a good opportunity for that.
So, Senator, do you think we will, obviously, I mean, everybody's pleased. Colin and Michael will talk about the OPEC Plus deal. Everyone's pleased there was a deal. Everybody always wants more. There was a little bit of disappointment in the markets about it. I'll let them talk about it. But do you feel like there's an understanding in Washington that we've got to have higher oil prices than where we are now if we're really going to save all these jobs? Do you think they're thinking about incremental ways to help, or what's the understanding in Washington around the kind of oil price that's needed to protect the U.S. oil industry?
Well, look, I think the first and foremost thing that the president, his team, and the senators who care about the energy industry were focused on was the actions by the Saudis and the Russians that were kind of adding fuel to the fire of the collapse in the price of oil. Everybody knows there was a big demand shock, and that was probably driving most of the price declines. But the supply shock, particularly the Saudi announcement of 12.3 million barrels, didn't help at all. And so getting that price war to end, having an agreement, Dan Yergin called it the most unprecedented, complex agreement that he's ever seen in his career. I talked to the president about it yesterday. He tweeted on this yesterday that it's, I think people are looking at about 10 million barrels off. There's some talk that this is actually more, given the, he talked about upwards of 20 million a day off the global markets because of the countries outside of OPEC that are, likely either cutting back or will be losing production, unfortunately, like our country. And what the IEA is looking at doing in terms of filling up strategic stocks around the world. So I think it was important. It's a 2-year deal. The Saudi energy minister directly stated to me when I asked him on Saturday that, if this isn't working, they would look to do more. I think they're going to 8.5 million barrels a day, which is the lowest level they've been at since 2011. So, but I'll tell you this, Maynard, the senators who care about this are going to be monitoring it closely, because if we see countries like Saudi Arabia that aren't keeping up with their end of the bargain, we will look at removing troops. The fundamental change, I can't emphasize it enough. Again, I'm somebody who's very focused on national security issues, but there's a lot of us who really, really felt burned at a moment of vulnerability, and felt that they were actually coming after our workers and industry, and that's not going to be forgotten anytime soon.
I got to maybe wrap up the Russians. I think, again, this is Colin and Mike's area of expertise, but that was a big cut they made. I guess another way of saying it is they had to, I don't know if they lost some face, but they, Putin doesn't look, kind of looks vulnerable now, or at least has a chink in his armor. What do you make of the Russians? How does it, the Russians show up in every annoying hotspot around the planet on the other team from us. What's the state of U.S., Russia, and what do you make of the Russians' participation in all this?
Well, look, the Russians, Putin plays a weak hand quite well when you look at them. Because their economy, I think, is probably smaller than Italy's, and but they have a large military. You're right; they're in places in the Middle East, playing a big role in energy markets. I do think the president deserves a lot of credit on bringing Putin to the table, bringing the Saudis to the table. I know he deserves a lot of credit because I was pretty aware of the very active diplomacy that he was undertaking. When the New York Times is lauding the President of the United States right now on a diplomatic win, that there's probably a lot happened in that regard. But, I think that the Russians, I always say, look, for better relationships, it's between the United States and Russia, it's up to the Russians. If you quit interfering in our elections and other things like that, there's probably a number of areas where we can work with them. But they haven't always played a constructive role, that's for sure, whether in the Middle East or other places. But I do think they played a constructive role here. Finally, again, I think a lot of the anger on this recent move was actually directed at the Saudis. When I was asked recently, well, how come you weren't putting so much emphasis in your actions with other senators towards the Russians? And my answer was simple. We don't have thousands of troops in Russia protecting Russia. This is something that we're kind of used to them being a difficult player in the international arena. But, a country like Saudi Arabia, where the relationship isn't always perfect, but we have a lot of leverage with them, and them working to take out our workers and industry, not acceptable. And I think that was one of the things that helped get to a deal on this as well.
Well, we all of us in oil and gas land in America broadly, we owe you a big thank you, because I just can't wait for you to run for president, because I'm ready to vote.
No, that ain't gonna happen. I gotta get reelected in November.
Well, I'll vote by mail or otherwise. I'll go stand in a big line. I don't care. But anyway, let me thank you, Senator, and let me just ask Colin and Mike to jump in here, in particular on the OPEC Plus deal. What'd you think? What were the reactions? What's the chatter in the market? What might come next? Colin, I'll start with you.
Okay. I think for my perspective, the main fact that's kind of interesting is this emphasis on the amount of production per day. So you still see a lot of people questioning, did it really matter that the Mexicans took off the 300,000 barrels per day? Did it really matter that there was 10 million barrels per day mooted as the target when we have a 20 million barrel per day plus hit to demand? If you take a look at this chart, this is our contribution this week for the visual of the week. And here what we're doing is looking at the cumulative takeoff of supply through 2020 and then also through 2022. And we think this is a more useful way to look at it because, of course, as the senator just said, what was really important was the duration for the deal that came out of OPEC. And so quickly, just running through the bars, we have three demand side factors. A warm winter contributed 40 million barrels of build. The COVID-19 breakout in China back in February and March gave us 517 million barrels of build. What we're calling the global intercession has given us at least 2 billion barrels of build. And the big question mark there is what kind of demand recovery is appropriate to build into the back end of the year. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then on the supply side, we have four factors. The Saudi threat of a price war, thanks to the good efforts of the senator and the president and others, was halted from its full form as a threat. And we only saw 78 million barrels of supply actually make it into the market. And now, of course, we have the OPEC Plus pact and the price-driven shut-ins. And the reason why the duration is important, particularly on a tapered basis all the way through April 2022, is if the deal is actually adhered to, and of course, reasonable people can question whether that will happen, but if it actually is adhered to, we'll see 2 billion barrels come out because of the OPEC Plus pact, and we should see upwards of 300 million barrels or more come out of price-driven shut-ins. Then today, and I think Mike's going to talk a little bit about this, we had the question of whether Texas should prorate production. And what was really interesting about the Texas situation is you're talking about 1 million barrels per day. So even if it lasts for 2 months, yes, it's 20% of some of the local supply in the light tight oil plays, but it's only going to be maybe 60 million barrels. So in comparison to these billions of barrels of demand and supply side effects, it really doesn't count. And so I promise to talk a little bit about the demand side. If you look at the right-hand side of our slide here, through 2022, if OPEC sticks with its supply cuts, we'll see 4.8 billion barrels of liquids come out of the world. This gets to the point on why gas is starting to show some signs of getting bullish. And the big question mark, just to finish the point, is whether it is appropriate to build in a V-shaped recovery in the second half of 2020, or whether we'll see some kind of effect where the lights are on in the shops, but there's no foot traffic, or the airplanes are running, but nobody feels comfortable in boarding the planes. And so that's going to be the key tension as we get to the second half of the year.
Mike, what's your take?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Colin said just a little while ago. First of all, on the OPEC cut, if you look at prices today, they're down, and people are looking at that and saying, well, this is a disappointing deal. And I would say that's a false premise there altogether. I think what's going on right now is just the physical market is just weak. I mean, demand is terrible, and supply is continuing to basically overwhelm storage. And so you're going to be running out. And one of the things that we heard in the Texas Railroad Commission meeting today, as a matter of fact, it's still going on. It was supposed to only be a couple hours, and it's probably going to go all day. But everyone to a T was saying we are going to run out of storage. The pipeline operators are saying that they're proportioning people on the lines, and that you're going to be seeing storage issues, Cushing issues in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And they're expecting that May is when you're going to start to see massive shut-ins. Some people think there could be as much as 3 to 4 million barrels of shut-ins. So I think that's what you're seeing in WTI at this point in time. It's really not the OPEC deal. It's really the physical market is going to be pretty dangerous here over the next couple months. We will recover, but that's the reality of the situation at this point in time.
So there really wasn't an OPEC Plus announcement that could have helped us avert filling storage.
Yeah, I think what you had is, we talked a lot about it last week about the USO roll, affecting the May contract as they rolled it into the June contract. I think that was a lot of the weakness. And now what you're just seeing is traders are saying the physical markets are just very heavy and they're just loading into it at this point in time. So I think you're going to be sitting there over the next couple of weeks. If you look at oil prices, you're going to be depressed. But just like Colin said, I think you have to look at the duration of the OPEC Plus deal. I think that's the key. That's going to take us higher in the second half of this year. How high, it's going to be totally dependent on whether it's a V-shape or L-shape recovery. And I think it's going to be, I think you're going to be looking at prices with a 4 handle on it, sometime in the second half of this year.
So let's ask our friend David Maravilla from Horizon. David, last week we talked a lot about OPEC Plus and Russia. We brainstormed a lot of things. Nobody, and not even Colin Fenton or Mike Bradley, predicted that the Mexicans would be this last-minute problem that, if you believe some of the press, almost blew up the deal. So here to defend the Mexican government, I'm joking with you, David, but here to explain a little bit about it is David Maravilla. David, let me ask you to help us understand that.
Sure, and hello from Mexico City. I think that what we saw over the weekend regarding Mexico's position during the OPEC Plus negotiation is a reflection of the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also known as AMLO in the media, energy policy. AMLO has pledged to boost oil production in the country. That proved to be a very popular campaign pledge during the campaign trail. And now he's sticking to this promise. He's put a lot of resources and political capital into allegedly rescuing the company, which has had a downward trend of production over the last decade. So it doesn't really come as a surprise that AMLO, being a hardline leftist with very strong nationalistic views, refuses to cut down production to what was required by OPEC members. In the end, Mexico agreed to cut only 5.5% of total production, but in the end, this is very aligned with AMLO's idea or efforts to restore the company's position as the backbone of the energy industry in the country. Now, I'd like to highlight that the way that Mexico behaved during the negotiations has been portrayed in the national media, in Mexican national media, as a diplomatic victory. Because now what we're seeing in the media is that different people that support the administration are saying that Mexico stood its ground to international pressure. I think that this may have a lot of ramifications for the country in the future. It is very likely that Mexico will be willing to further cut production in the upcoming negotiations, and that could escalate tensions between the country and other OPEC Plus members. I think that Mexico now is way more vulnerable to retaliation from other OPEC members, and also this is a very bad, this will entail to a certain degree reputational damage for the AMLO administration. AMLO is having a very hard time trying to convince international investors, foreign investors, to continue coming to the country because he has halted different business opportunities in the energy industry, but also in their industries. And now with this kind of behavior, this strategy, it's very likely that a lot of investors will think twice before putting money in Mexico. And this doesn't really help the country's economic outlook, which is currently stalled due to the outbreak, but also because we had a slowdown of the economic activity last year.
So this is, wow, we could spend a lot of time on this, David, but I think your punchline is maybe they did win this battle, but they may lose the war. It may not have.
Yeah, I think that there will be ramifications. And I think that it's very unlikely that we see the administration shifting its strategy in the following negotiations. AMLO will refuse most likely to cut further Pemex production because that's a key item of his current agenda.
Matt Portillo, we were going to visit with you as we move towards wrapping up. Matt is co-head of our research effort and has been talking a lot about natural gas for a while now. I think we've got some good news to hear from you if you're an energy producer. Matt, take it away.
Yeah, Maynard, this has been a big topic of conversation with investors over the last month and a half, and I think the outcome for the bearish crude price environment is potentially going to be a very positive tailwind for natural gas, not only in the near term, but over the next 2 years. So 3 key things are going on right now. First, as Colin mentioned, expectations are rising for potentially material shut-ins of U.S. oil production, which will start to curtail associated volumes. And by our calculation, if U.S. oil production moves in line with refinery run cuts, we could see potentially 6 to 7 BCF a day of associated gas lost from the market. That will continue to strengthen the front end of the curve. Secondly, from a structural perspective, the reduction in capital allocation to oil basins is going to lead to material supply declines in the U.S. to the tune of about 5.5 BCF a day of gas, which actually sets the market up to be structurally short supply going into 2021 and potentially leads to higher gas prices. I think the third and most interesting conversation is a change in producer behavior. We've seen from both private and public producers really indications that as gas prices rally further from here, that you're unlikely to see a response on the drill bit front. Really, producers are looking at using that extra free cash flow to start paying down debt and working down their leverage profile. And I think that's giving investors a lot more comfort around the broader macro trends as we head into 2021. So for our forecast at the moment, we are expecting gas prices to start to stabilize here and potentially move higher towards $2 an MCF during the summer timeframe. And then as we go into 2021, we are expecting a move potentially north of $3 an MCF, which would be a big tailwind for a lot of the gas E&Ps in our coverage.
So Matt, I was telling a friend about your thesis yesterday, and I won't name names, but the friend said, "Oh, it'll be short-lived." Do you think that this natural gas price improvement that you're describing, how long do you think that might go on for?
I think it's really the structural change in the producer behavior around capital allocation that's really going to drive the forecast in 2021 and beyond. And again, the conversation from Haynesville privates as well as public producers in the Northeast and in the other legacy gas basins really indicate that the industry is not willing to accelerate growth like they have in the past. And I think that's really always been the bigger problem is growth over value has been kind of the mantra for the sector for a long period of time, which has continually driven down natural gas prices. And I think that the combination of lack of access to capital in conjunction with that change in the mindset going forward actually could balance the market at higher prices than people generally expect.
So just looking at your chart, you're thinking we might see $3 in 2021 as well as 2022.
That's where we're shaking out today. Absent material rally in crude above kind of 50, I think our forecast would probably hold around 3 for next year and probably in 2022 as well.
So is that another way of saying you don't really see oil getting meaningfully above 50 over that same time period?
I think we could see, oil stabilize in the $50+ range. You're also seeing a similar dynamic on the crude side, where producers are really going to be focusing on balance sheet repair and improving their cash flow profile. And so even if we get a healthier rally in crude prices, I think the mindset around kind of unending growth has changed in a big way. And I think we see the moderation of associated gas, even in a crude rally, becoming a more important factor in the macro trends as we move forward.
Well, that's a great place to end. I just want to say thank you, Senator. It was so fantastic to have you. Thank you, David, and thank you to the team. And we'll see you all again next week, so stay safe out there.